Welcome to Wrestling with God. We're here in the Twisted Wrestling studios on New Year's Eve. And so first of all, I want to wish you all a happy New Year's Eve and want to bring a message to you that will bring and ring in the new year, that hopefully it'll be a message of hope. I'm sure you're wondering what I have on. But this is Wrestling with God. This is the Twisted Wrestling Studios. This is All's Fair in Love and War. So, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Joseph Sarracino. I'm 68 years old. And in June 9th of 2018, I became the oldest man in the world who made his pro wrestling debut at 61. At that point in time, my son Joey was with me, and that began a journey of faith, which brings us to the title and the campaign for 2025. And for those of you who have seen our Facebook page, Wrestling with God, our YouTube channel, Wrestling with God, our campaign is going to be Fighting for the Faith. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this evening and hopefully bring you up to speed a little bit more of what's going to be happening here at Wrestling with God as we share our weekly messages. But back in 1984, I began the senior pastor after attending some theological schools. We started in January of 1984, and we started a work in Fontana, California, called the Church of Fontana. And during that time, all the way through 1990, we made an impact in the city. We had some ebbs, we had some flows, and during that period, I went through some transitional thinking concerning, is this as good as it gets? We had a full-time associate. We had praise and worship people. As a matter of fact, if you were to say, well, Joe or Pastor Joe, how come you're still not pastoring officially? Well, it wasn't because I had an affair. It wasn't because I spent all the money in the church. I don't do that. As a matter of fact, our accountant said our record keeping was too good. So whatever that means, for those of you who are the tax collectors, we were able to still produce a good work at that point in time. But back in about 1989, I began to have not what you would call a crisis of faith, but I began to get caught up into the machine of what we call today the ministry. And in the ministry, especially for somebody that was young in ministry, you begin to be so filled with the pressures, the bills, the overhead, the offerings that you needed to take, pressing the people when you probably shouldn't have pressed them. And during that time, I actually met with my board, and I says, would you give me 30 days so I can have some time to consider even my own life and where we're heading with the Church of Fontana. We were probably running for a smaller church, maybe $150,000 a year. We probably had 175 people at our peak. And so with the blessing at that time of my wife, I had a friend, David Lee, who had a cabin up in Crestline. And I had them drop me off. And for 30 days, I says, pick me up in 30 days. And for 30 days, I didn't do anything but drink water. And I began to read the scriptures. And during that period, I actually read the Bible through in 8 straight days. And what that did, it caused me, at least at that point in time, to get a sense or a view, maybe like a bird's eye view, where I might not have recognized some things that I might have known or learned in the past, especially growing up as a young minister. But I also, over those 30 days, and I think it took place in October of 1989, I've probably gleaned things off of that time with just me and the Lord, probably for the last 40 years. And then in 1990, I stepped away from the church, but never the Lord. And during that period, I just began to take stock in really my life and what I felt was important for my family. And consequently, during that period, my first wife ended up leaving me. She actually left me for somebody at the gym. Get me? And guess what, guys? Even back then, maybe I would have left me. You follow me? We're not pulling any punches today, all right? So maybe I would have left me. She was a class act. I helped her raise two kids from 4 and 6 years old until they were 18 or 20. And there was a period where, again, there was a falling out, a separation, maybe lost interest, and there was a divorce. That brings me to Florida. So back in 2004, I had met someone, Joey's mama, Carmela. And I had known her for a couple years prior to that. And in 2004, we ended up getting married. During that period, I was 14 years old, 14 years older than her. And then in October of 2004, Joey was born, which made me 48 years older than him. Then on May 30th, I believe it was, of 2012, Joey's mama passes away. You know, I mean, everything that I had come to believe, all my hopes, all my dreams, coming what it might have appeared to be from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, you know, back in the days when I ministered, you know, I had some cred in the community. I was involved in ministerial meetings. Matter of fact, when the first President Bush freed Kuwait, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. For a medical conference, and I got to have the opening prayer at a congressional breakfast the day that the first Bush freed Kuwait. And so again, you know, I had gone in and out of different flavors, as it were, in the church. I came from essentially a Pentecostal movement. I mean, you name it. You know, I don't want to say we rolled in the aisles, but maybe some did. I mean, you know, we praised the Lord, we worshiped, we spoke in tongues. I mean, you know, all that was something that what I refer today, not so much spiritual, a spiritual life, but some of that could have even been enthusiasm. And at the same time, there's nothing wrong with enthusiasm, because we all know in Isaiah 1:18, the psalmist David says, "Give me a clean heart, O Lord. Renew a right spirit within me." And so during that time, I felt like we were moving up, doing what we needed to do. My marriage now seemed that it was in a crumbled state. I come out to Florida, and then all of a sudden, after a couple years or so, a little longer than that, Joey's mama passes away. Now I'm terrified. What am I going to do? I'm thinking about, Lord, you brought me all the way out here for this. There's got to be a bigger purpose than what we're experiencing right now. But I do want to tell you this. That evening when Carmela passed away, it was 11 o'clock at night, and there was an officer that came to my door. Knocked on the door, I opened it up, and he said, "Mr. Sarracino?" I said, "Yeah." "We just want to let you know that your wife passed away," and handed me a card and left. So you could just imagine not only the mixed emotions, the dread, the wonderment, just absolutely blown away. I mean, it was like I was hit with a ton of bricks. You know, I was hit, got like a jab and a punch and a kidney shot and a face shot. The good news was, if there was any good news at all, Joey was at a sleepover at his cousin's. The not so good news was the next morning I was going to have to go get him and tell him he'd never see his mother again. But I want to share this with you. When I showed up at the house where Carmela's body was at her mother's home, there was the minister from the Assembly of God Church, there was a deacon, I think there was some family members, there was Grandpa and Grandma. And keep in mind, I still hadn't talked to Joey yet. And the reason I'm bringing these things up to you now is the theme, the vision for 2025 with Wrestling with God is fighting for the faith. Fighting for the faith. And I went right into fighting mode in light of what I felt was going to be necessary to be able to make some sense to my son out of losing a mother at 7 years old. And I walked into the house, the pastor, the board member, the associates, a couple family members, and I walked straight into the door and I said, first of all, I don't want anyone ever to say to Joey that Jesus took his mommy. And we've heard a lot of foolishness in light of this kind of a thing. And again, I know we all have our feelings, and if you're getting a little twisted, if you're getting a little bent, just bear with me because it may not be like you think. Just stay with me over this next year, if you would. I says, I don't want anyone to say, Jesus took your mommy. So a 7-year-old then is going to grow up thinking the very life that he held on to, the maternal life, God decides to take it away, well, he'd become my enemy too. And so we began to move on. And I began to try to do the best I could. I don't want to get too far into the story, but all of a sudden, here we are now with an opportunity, which many of you know, that I began to actually train, began to take Joey to wrestling events, and one thing led to another, and Fred Ottman had a training school, and Frankie Reyes was the head trainer, and they were talking with Joey actually, and encouraging him everywhere I could take him. I'd have him encourage him. I'd have him share with him. I kept thinking, Lord, what can we do to help this kid get through the potential grief, and maybe even the grief in the future that he was going to have to fight for his own faith, if you know what I'm saying. He was going to have to fight and hold on and grab on to everything he knew was true. But at that point in time, and at that age, the only person you can grab onto was his daddy. Because where his mind was, where his maturity was, and here I'm terrified. I'm thinking, how am I going to raise this kid? He doesn't even have his mama. And thankfully, again, Grandma and Grandpa were an integral part over the next several years. But during that period when they were talking to Joey, and Frankie Reyes said, one day if you want to become a wrestler, you got to do this, that, and the other. And I said to Frankie, well, would you train a 60-year-old? Not for boxing. He goes, for what? I says, for wrestling. And that led to me for 17 months and Joey going up above Buck Stadium to a light industrial park, sometimes twice from Northport. That led to me training, and one thing led to another in June 9th of 2018, because I was, even during that period, I was fighting for the faith. Lots of stories in between we'll be able to share in the future, but fighting, wanting to make sure that this kid had a sense that he could grab onto something bigger than himself. And during that period, when I began to make my pro wrestling debut, we had just a great and wonderful time. The wrestling community gathered around us, they supported us, and I'll be eternally grateful for them. But that in mind, now let's move all the way up to where we're at today. We're in the twisted. You say, wait a second, you got boxing gloves on. Twisted Wrestling Studios, we're versatile. We can have a boxing match if you want. You're upset with me with some of the things some of the crazies came out of the woodwork on that last Christmas Eve thing I did. Oh yeah, we don't want to focus on them. You want to do it. You following me? I shared 38 minutes and I already got people messaging me on Facebook going, he's a heretic, take it down. I got called worse. And you know what my response was? No response. Because I'm not here for them. I'm here because I feel like I have a message, I have a mission, and with that in mind, I'm here to also fight for the faith. Not only did we cause and create an atmosphere and an environment to be able to have wrestling matches. How about a couple boxing matches? Will box with me? 68? We can box. Maybe not. Look, I got my boxing shoes, right? Got the gloves. You do realize I can't cheat during this message. I can't open the Bible. I can't turn pages. I can't smoke a cigarette if I wanted. I don't smoke, so just, there you have it. But I want to tell you about someone else who fought for the faith. After Jesus was baptized, he was led into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. Now keep in mind, back in 1989, when I asked my board to allow me to go for 30 days where I didn't drink, I drank, but I didn't eat for 30 days. That was enough, and I thought that was going to take me down. But again, it was something I felt I needed to do. So now the Lord is led into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights to fast. And during that period, it said afterwards he began to hunger. And you know what? When you begin to hunger, there are going to be several things that are offered to you. Several things on the menu. And the devil shows up. Now, when I make a comment like this, those of you who are not church people, I don't want you to hear me so much about this story being a historical fact, which I believe it is. For now, I need you to hear me like it's a parable. There's principles. There's things that we can learn. Because, friends, church people are not church people. When you run out of hope, when you stop fighting for the faith, whatever it is that you believe, and there's no hope left, why do you think we have in our society what we have today about suicide rates, people taking their lives, children at record rates, saying they don't want to live any longer? What the hell is wrong with that? Well, part of that is it's a society that has separated itself against or away from the principles of God. It's separated from the truth and love of God. And when you separate yourself from God, just like the garden experience, you're left alone. And I want to tell you something, it's not a good feeling to be left alone. I didn't want Joey to feel left alone. So the devil shows up and says to the Lord, I see you're hungry. You're the Lord's son. Why don't you take these stones and turn them into bread? And you know what Jesus said to him? He said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Later on, the devil takes him to a precipice. For some of you, that's up on a mountain. That's up on a large hill. And he says, the Bible says that Satan's now quoting the scripture. Actually, that happens a lot, I think, in some of our churches. They don't even realize they're being used other than, we'll get to that sometime. No offense. We'll get back because, look, even the accepted religious society of that day, the Pharisees, they found themselves at odds against the Lord. I mean, here, this is God's Son come to the flesh, to this nation, and they see him as an adversary. They even said at one point in time, because people were beginning to receive his message, they said, if we don't do something about this guy, he's going to take away our place and nation. There was another time they began to grab him and take him, and they were going to throw him off the edge of the cliff. You know what it said? No, he didn't punch, he didn't jab, he didn't hook. It said he walked out right from the midst of them. And in the midst of trials and adversity, sometimes you just need to walk out. So now the second thing, he takes him up on this hill and he says, your Bible, your scriptures say he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. Why don't you cast yourself down, jump off of there, God will protect you. You know what the Lord says? Thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God. In another place, he says, I'm going to show you the kingdoms of the world. I'm going to show you the kingdoms of the world. You won't have to fight for the faith anymore. I'll just give it to you. I'm going to show you the kingdoms of the world. I'll offer all of them to you if you'll bow down and worship me. What the heck? I mean, you don't think that the Lord knew he already had all the kingdoms of the world? He's being offered, and see, that's what happened today. You want to call him Satan, you want to call him the evil one, you want to call him whatever you want to call him. There is an unregenerate part of our mind, even call it that will say, if you will follow me instead of good and truth. See, because the Lord's good and truth. We'll give you all these things when maybe you didn't realize that you had access to them all the time. And so the Lord turns around and says to him, you know what? Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God in him alone. And the devil left for a season. Jesus was fighting for the faith. Jesus knew that he had come for a purpose. And I know, again, some of you church people think it's a fable, a parable, because a lot of what's been presented isn't commensurate with the life led that those that are preaching it would follow. Am I saying hypocrite? Yeah, I'm saying hypocrite. Am I one of those hypocrites? Absolutely. But I think the biggest thing we can do to those who are unchurched is first let them know that we are fallible too. We're learning too. We have a desire for good and truth. And so with that in mind, we need to come to a place where those of you just take these principles for now. Let's not argue about the science of it or have all of these, big meetings where 1,000 people come and you got one person, who's an atheist and one person who's a minister, and see who can outmaneuver one another with words. You want to know how to outmaneuver somebody? You want to know how to fight for the faith? It's not with words. It's not science. It's not history. How about living a life commensurate with our Lord? How about living holiness rather than just saying one thing and living another? You following me? Now we'll talk real quick about politics. You realize that politics, we learning anything out there in the crowd? Politics is nothing more than spiritual warfare in its highest earthly environment. Politics is spiritual warfare on its highest earthly plane. But let me tell you something about politics, and those of you who are church people, man, you got to watch out. You're gonna lose. You might gain a bunch of people, but you're going to lose your soul because you decided you want to try to control and bring people in your way rather than the Lord's way. I got to tell you something. The scripture also says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Get it? We don't wrestle. We don't box. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness, wickedness in high places. What's that saying? Me and you fussing with one another, squaring off with one another, family members breaking fellowship with one another, ministers getting up in the pulpit and trying to tell the people who they ought to vote for or what they ought to do. And we can get into that too. Then you got the people say, well, what do we do? Do we just sit here and let the world go to hell in a handbasket? Well, yeah, it's going to anyway if you don't follow the Lord and do it his way. Because we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We didn't wrestle against Donald Trump, and we don't wrestle against Joe Biden. And whoever the president is today, because it's Donald Trump, we ought to pray for him, support him, and do the best we can to wish him the best, and for God to be able to lead him, and hopefully the guy will even listen. And so I'm hopeful. But see, if we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness and powers, then you need to recognize that in our 5 physical senses, there's a good chance, I believe it, there are several things that are occurring and taking place that we'll be talking about that when we talk about fighting for the faith in 2025. Then I want to begin to bring another thing home. How many of you remember the story of Job? Now, those of you who remember the story of Job, the story was there was a pact essentially made, an agreement made. And it said that the devil came to the Lord, and Job, at that point in time, was a member of the community that was well respected and honored. And when he would show up in the gates and he'd walk into the villages, they'd say, "That's Job. Look at his family. Look how blessed he is. He's wealthy. He's healthy. He's got 7 children. He's got 14 children, 7 daughters, 7 sons, cattle, real estate." I mean, he made Yellowstone look pitiful. And during that point in time, the devil comes up to God and says, "You know what? Your people don't serve you, and I can get your people to curse you to your face." And God said, "Really? Have you considered my servant Job? Because there's none like him in the land." And the devil says, "Well, you got a hedge again around him. You take that hedge down, I will in fact have him curse you to your face." And again, for the sake of the argument, of the historical, the science, was it a parable? Did it really happen? Let's talk about the principle. So the hedge comes down and all kinds of calamity begins to occur in Job's life. I am telling you, I mean calamity. He started losing his cattle. Disasters took place. It tore down his homes. All of a sudden now, his daughters and sons, they're dead. They die. And all of a sudden, when this man who had everything had to face having nothing, he makes a statement. There's a few statements that we'll talk about, and we'll begin to cover more as we talk about fighting for the faith. But I want you to listen to this. He said, "The thing that I most greatly feared came upon me." Friends, church, fear is an okay motivator, but an extreme amount of fear, dread, sleepless nights, doing everything you can do to try to keep from fear, it'll debilitate you. In the world, again, help me here, I'm going to be a little sassy. In the world, they used to call it a shit magnet. What I mean by that was when you begin to attract something, it's because you have put out that spirit. You've put out that, he says, "The thing that I most greatly feared, it came upon me, I attracted it." So you need to be careful in your life about fear. Stress is a good motivator. You following me? But you need to put that into perspective, because I was at first deathly afraid. I was afraid what I was going to do, how I was going to take care of Joey. I mean, here, I'm 48 years older than him, but I'm fighting, and I'm still not sure even during that time what my purpose was, what my place was. I grew up in California, I became a minister. My wife leaves me, my first. I come out here, Joey's born, his mama passes away, but I'm fighting. And now I'm fighting for him, and I think that was probably my salvation, because this innocent soul now has to rely on somebody just like we have to begin to rely on God. And so during that period, Job comes down now with boils. He's in a heap of ashes, scraping his body. He's lost everything. His house is gone. His children are gone. His livestock are gone. Now his wife's still there. And there is a statement that occurs in there that many of you don't get to understand the keys to the kingdom and know the secrets of heaven because you didn't read this story correctly about Job and his wife. You ever heard of the word primer in mathematics? Primer usually is something that you will use to unlock something. It's almost like, have you ever heard Jesus being referred to as the chief cornerstone? See, without having a foundation, without having a sure foundation, if you don't have a sure foundation, then you're not going to be able to build anything that's going to last. You'll build your house on sand. We need to build our house on stone. And what stone is, get into that in the future. But now, I want you to think of Job. I want you to think about the mentality of his wife. Because when you understand the story of his wife. Do you know we don't even really know her name? But I want you to talk about, I want to talk about his wife for a minute. During that period and in that culture, do you think she had any say in any of Job's affairs? Could she do what some of us do today and say, Job, I don't want to do what you're telling me to do. You go sweep the floor. You go do this. You go shopping. No, in those days, probably just like some of the extreme religious people that are out there today, she had no rights. She was vulnerable to everything, whether her husband was doing great or now he's having a life of devastation. And she makes a statement that most of us attribute as a negative influence in his life. Job has lost everything. His wife is watching. Now keep in mind, she saw that he was a great man in the community. She probably felt good when he went out into the gates. That's my husband. I mean, man, I'm glad. I mean, they would, Job's wife. I mean, look, boy, I wish I had a husband like him. And now we're looking at a situation where they have nothing and they're at the brink of the insanity. And she looks at him and says, Job, why don't you just curse God and die? But guess what? Job wouldn't stop fighting. He was fighting for the faith. Let me tell you something about his response. He lost his house. He lost his children. He lost his livestock. He probably lost all of his income. And you know what he says to her? He says, hush, foolish woman. I know my Redeemer lives, and I shall see him again. And before I close today, I want you to think about, if you want to really get past the religious talk that occurs in today's church day and age. The story to understand Job is understanding his wife. The story to understand Job is how to understand what she was going through. If all you can do is attribute her as a negative influence, he told Job to curse God and die. She's going to go to hell. Are you insane? Because a lot of you think that way. Are you insane? Let me ask you something. Those of you who are mothers out there, have you ever lost a child? Hello, have you ever lost a child? Been through any grief? It's one thing to lose a child that breaches the womb. But how about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? I want you to think about the grief that this woman was going through. Her trust was in her husband, and it's all being taken away. Why is this happening to me? Have any of you ever said that? Why is this happening to me? But if you keep fighting, if you keep hanging on, you keep trying to figure it out, do you realize that his wife must have literally not been on the brink of insanity, but literally insane with grief and dread? Any of you love your children? Any of you ever lost one? She lost it all. And we're going to attribute, that's all we can do? We're going to attribute her as a negative influence because she said, curse God and die. Do you think God cared that she did that? We're going to talk about that more in the future too. But this I want to close with. Over the last several couple years, my son's been going through some things. I won't get into the details about it. Oh, look at this. Wait a second. What's this, Randy? What's this say here? It says, the Cooker's Gym. Help me. It says, Cooker's Gym, never give up, never quit, respect, legend. Let me get out of the shot there. You know what? I wonder if that banner was in Job's house. You following me? So, recently, Joey got into a horrible accident. He was life-flighted to the main hospital. And in truth, he wasn't supposed to take the truck. 20 years old now. And me still not recognizing what the loss of his mom did to him. You want to talk about loss. And I did everything I knew to do during that period to try to fill that void with the wrestling and going places and doing things. But there's only one person that could fill that void that had occurred within him. And at that point in time, no matter what I tried, no matter how much money I spent, no matter what it was, only the Lord can fill that void. A hopeless void. And with all the things that occurred over the last couple of years, and Joey's been really, really doing good, you should see what he does with his filming and editing. I mean, he videos a lot of the hip hop world. He was just at the Rolling Loud concert a couple weeks ago. He was on the stage with Future. Now, a few years ago, I wouldn't know who Future was. I would have known who Glenn Campbell was, or Styx, or Foreigner, but I didn't know. And you know what? He's doing so good, but he had a little bit of a glitch. Well, maybe a little more than a glitch. Almost broke my truck in half. And while he was in the ICU, I'm going to tell you a little story about what happened, and I'm going to soften it up so your ears don't fall off, because I wasn't happy. On the phone at one point in time, he says, Dad, he goes, there's a part of me that wished I would have just died there. I stopped. He says, what'd you say? What the hell? What'd you just say? I says, you don't get to determine when you die. And if you were trying to commit suicide, then you suck at suicide. You can't even kill yourself properly if that's what you were trying to do. Are you crazy? Are you insane? What if that effort, and I'm not saying he did, but you know, with our generation of children today, with all the insanity that's going on with genders and all that kind of stuff, don't even come to me with that kind of stuff right now. Go in your own lane. Don't come to the Twisted Wrestling. I may have to put the gloves back on. Want me to put the gloves back on? Okay. I says, what if you would have flubbed the dub? You would have ended up being in a vegetated state. You'd be laid out in this tomb now called a body, in a vegetated state, and your eyes might have been open. You'd be there like in a hell looking through these two beady eyes because you weren't sure if you wanted to live or not. Let me tell you something about that. And this is what I told him. In the church, I grew up Pentecostal church, and there's still a lot of my old-time gospel flavor. I got some of those roots, love it, enjoy it. We would hear this message, and people, church, I need you to hear this. Because you say you believe the scriptures, but can you live what you believe? I think you can't. And I said, Joey, in the church, you would hear things like, oh, blessed be the name of the Lord. Oh, blessed be the name of the Lord. He knows our beginning from our end. He knows every hair that's on top of our head. Oh, bless his name. And I says, Joey, I don't doubt what they said is true, but let me tell you something about that statement. If he knows your end, then he knows when you're going to die. If he's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, he knows how you're going to die. He knows the circumstances when you're going to die. You don't get to make that choice. We don't have a right in life to make that choice. You come to a place, friends, where you have no hope. I got to tell you something. There's an answer. And all you got to do is hang on for dear life. You got to want to fight for the faith. You got to want to keep going even in the midst of struggle. You got to do even what the Cooker's Gym says, to never give up, never quit. Respect the Lord, because you know what? Jesus is the legend. So with that in mind, I says, look, son, I says, you can turn this thing around. Crap, you might even live to be 90 years old. And he began to chuckle a little bit. And he began to think, because I think in the midst of pressure, we don't know what to think any further. And so actually, a few days ago, we were talking, and him and his girlfriend, and because of that, we have had some extreme issues financially. We got people, insurance, and oh my gosh, I even got a $30,000 bill last week. You're not going to be able to get a GoFundMe for that. Don't worry about it. I know how to address it. I'm going to just trust the Lord. But what I was saying to Joey during that period, because he's now feeling the pressure of all this, because I'm also saying it's still your responsibility and you got to figure this thing out, son. And I says, but I believe you can do this. And I said this to him. I says, do you know what I would do if it was me? He says, what? I says, I wouldn't quit. I says, I would never get up. I says, if everything was taken away, if the gym, if the studio, if the house, if the cars, like Job, if everything was taken away, I says, son, I'd get it back. I'd get it back. I'd get it back. He goes, how would you do it? I says, because I wouldn't quit. I just wouldn't quit. God knows my future. He knows how long I'm going to be here. He knows when I'm going to die. He knows how I'm going to die. He knows what time you go, well, what's the difference? What's the use then if he knows? Well, it's not so important that he knows. It's important that you know. You begin to make your right choices. You begin to turn your life around. And I said, son, my recommendation to you is like me. You're under a lot of pressure right now, so don't quit. There's going to be light on the other side. So I want to close with a scripture in John 7, verse 38. And I'm really going to close this time. I bet I can make it to 45. Listen to this. It says, he that believeth in me, the Lord is speaking. And I don't want you to think for a minute just about some mythical figure or some historical figure. I want you to think about divine truth speaking right now. Divine love speaking right now. Divine faith. You want to talk about somebody who's fought for the faith and won. And with that in mind, he says, any of you who want to follow me, you got to take up your own cross. It's just not he's going to do it for you. And, now your best life is wonderful and happy. And, when the crap hits the fan, you're going, well, I thought this was supposed to be, beautiful. No. Jesus said this. He says, he who believes in me, listen to this, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Now, what's that mean? Because that used to be an old gospel song. And we used to sing it like this. It said, I got a river of life flowing out of me, makes the lame to walk and the blind to see, opens prison doors, sets the captives free. I got a river of life flowing out of me. He that believeth, rivers of living water, the essence, the things that we need to get up with every day, not religious speak. You begin to grab into these things and you don't quit until you get this thing figured out. If you got to believe in something right now than nothing, because when you run out of hope, you're going to be like a lot of people are today. You aren't going to think life is worth living, and I'm telling you, life is worth living. And I'm going to tell you the same thing that I told Joey. Friends, don't give up. Hang in there with me week to week. This is the Wrestling with God second episode. The message and the campaign for 2025 is fighting for the faith. You want to come fight me? You angry with me? You want to call me a heretic? You want to say take it down? Stay in your own lane. Don't bother me with that nonsense. I ain't buying. I gave it the office. I am lit on fire with righteous indignation because our whole society is almost burning up because somebody isn't standing up and saying, don't quit. God is real. Trust in him. If you believe in him, out of your belly, see, out of your soul, not just your belly, it'll be rivers of living water. Folks, we're going to see you hopefully in a week from now. I want you to share this if you think it has any value. And I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to quit. How about you? Have a nice day.